We're live.
Hello, everybody. So exciting. We are in our second week of talking science. And on that subject, we are welcoming Owen, who is a co-founder and president of a company called rBio. And he is also a synthetic biologist. So Cam, we have all kinds of questions for you. First of all, what's synthetic biology? What are bio doing and what's on your mind? And answer one at a time.
Yeah, sure. So I'll answer the last question first here. What's on my mind? So as a biologist and really specifically a microbiologist, I spend a lot of my time thinking about how synthetic biology is turning science fiction into science fact. For me at rBio, if you can imagine, programming cells the same way that we would program computers, I'm really talking about building tiny biological factories that could produce everything from insulin to biofuels to all sorts of other peptides and whatnot. In a way, sometimes I think that we're living through an episode of Black Mirror, but instead of a dystopian nightmare, I really like to think that there is a happy ending at the end of it. So at rBio, we really started as a cellular engineering company. Can we build synthetic cells? If we can, what can we do with that? Fast forward now 4.5 years, and we've created a biological platform that augments the expression of protein synthesis. So if you think of something like insulin.
Tell us, what enables that? You are referring to it like it's a big revolution, right? And we're watching a science fiction movie. What enabled it?
Yeah, so I think we'd have to go back maybe 50 some odd years back into the late 70s, early 80s. And that's when recombinant DNA technology was really coming to the forefront. And that's 25 years after the discovery of DNA. So quite an accelerated process. And scientists were using, splicing and editing genomes of bacteria or yeast, smaller single-celled organisms, and recombining them in ways that, Mother Nature had not done previously. I think it was 1982. Don't hold me to that date when the first recombinant DNA product was approved by the FDA, which was actually insulin. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that because we work with that here on our side. So I'm not sure I answered your question there, but how we do it specifically is instead of just recombining what's already there, is really designing it from scratch. And that's where the whole synthetic biology thing comes into play. You're designing biology in ways that doesn't exist or has not existed to do things that it has not done previously.
Is the goal of doing that, as opposed to using more traditional recombinant approaches, is that to make it more efficient? Is it to actually co-opt the infrastructure of the cell to do, to make more? I mean, what's the benefit that you're trying to do in rBio?
Sure. So from a commercializable standpoint, the first year of this company, it was really just, like I said, cellular engineering and just kind of tweaking and playing around with it. But of course, if you're going to have a business, at some point you have to make money. You have to have some type of commercializable thing for your technology. And so for us, we recognized and realized that by doing it the way we were doing it, if it led to higher yield increases of these peptides, well, now you have really a manufacturing platform. So I guess to answer your question, for us specifically, that's how we saw it. I mean, you can use that technology for a range of different things, but of course, if you can just produce, let's say, insulin at a higher unit per volume than your competitors, obviously you have something special there.
Where
go ahead, Jeff.
Sorry. Where, Cam, do you think where do you see these techniques, where do you envision they will be the most impactful over time? And I'm sure that the technology continues to evolve and so forth, but where do you see it as being most impactful?
Yeah, sure. And this is just obviously my opinion when I say this, but there's really four, I'm going to call it low-hanging fruits of what synthetic biology can do right now. A longer term answer to your question would really be, what is that? We don't know. In the same way that maybe personal computing in the 80s, people saw a couple applications, but
Right.
very few people predicted internet, the fact that we would be on computers all the time, social media, things like that. They just weren't even thoughts. So, but to come back, those four low-hanging fruits that, as I see it, the first one is manufacturing, which of course we specialize in at rBio. The second one would certainly be drug development, right? Can you engineer microorganisms for the production of pharmaceutical, other therapeutic compounds, things like that? Third one that I would see it would be customized therapy. So now you're tailoring medical treatments to the individual, based on maybe their genetic profile or something like that. I think we all see, individualized medicine is probably the future there. And then the fourth one, which I think is probably the most creative and most fun maybe, would be bioremediation. How can you design microbes capable of breaking down pollutants, toxins, plastics, things like that. So those are the four ones that I see, but certainly there could be many, many more, and will be.
There was a protein or there was an organism discovered, I think, in Japan that was breaking down plastics, and that was an angle I think that some of the folks in your field were trying to pursue.
Totally.
So I've come across a couple. I mean, Ginkgo Bioworks is probably the one that might be sort of the most well known. But like, you're in a space that probably to most people wouldn't feel like it has a huge amount of competition, but actually there's a lot of interest within that and within your circles. I'm sure that you know a lot more. How do you see that sort of landscape in this early stage of this technology?
Totally. This is definitely in its infancy. I like to use the analogy again of personal computing, probably back in the 80s. You had some companies at that time that were doing some things. Nobody really knew, what the market potential of those were going to be. Obviously, the most valuable companies today were companies that were started around that time. I really see this industry in the same light currently. The Human Genome Project that went on officially for 13 years, but certainly for longer than that, and really still goes on today, was really discovering, okay, what's actually there, what's written in our genes, what's written in the genes of other microorganisms. Hey, if we knock this out, if we knock this gene out, what happens? It's really allowed discovering what's there. I think the past several years of biology and by extension synthetic biology has turned to, okay, we've got a pretty good understanding of what that is now. The question is, what do we do with it? How do we manipulate it? What are the benefits of doing so? There's certainly downsides of manipulating biology, things that keep me up at night, no doubt. But of course, you can manipulate it in ways that would benefit society, and we like to view ourselves as a good player there.
Wow. Well, I have a question actually, sort of echoing what Eric was saying and what you were just saying just now. When you were describing the field, it very much feels that this type of work would be done at an academic institution, right? And yet here you are starting a startup doing that. So I kind of have a question about that.
Sure.
What started this work, and what was it like to do something really kind of, futuristic, so to speak, right? Outside of the typical environment where this kind of things are done. So tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I'll actually tell you a quick story. So this takes me back now into the fall of 2019. I really saw the writing on the wall, I guess, as it relates to synthetic biology. Hey, this is the future. There were some applications that were coming out of how do you use synthetic biology? How does that even work? And so I wanted to actually get my PhD in this. And so I applied to 3 different schools, was living in San Francisco at the time. So applied to Cal, Berkeley, UCSF, and Stanford, which are like 3 out of the top 5 schools in the world for stuff like that. And they came back and said, hey, this is a good idea, what you're thinking about, but you really don't have the research experience that we would typically want to see from a PhD candidate. So, come back to us, in a year or something if you do. So, I was at the time certainly devastated, thinking, man, this is such a good idea. Why is nobody believing in it, whatnot? Reached out to a couple friends of mine. I did grad school at Johns Hopkins for a master's. So I was connected into the Johns Hopkins network. And I said, I'm really looking for maybe a couple co-founders who could launch a business in this, turn this PhD idea into a business, and hey, we'll do some research for a year. And if it comes back great, awesome. Now we have a viable business that we can take forward. And if it doesn't, or if it needs more work, well then, hey, now I have that type of experience that I can go back and say, hey, I hedged my bets here. Now, please take me back. I really still do want to do that. And so we formed as a legal entity in February of 2020. And I think most people understand what happened about a month later, which in a way was actually a massive and enormous blessing in disguise for us, because we got into a research lab at the University of Nevada, Reno. And that's really where a lot of this work got started. And because of, the COVID era, that nobody was on campus. So I really had access to all of this equipment and technology and resources that, a couple month old startup would never have had access to, just because nobody else was using it.
I feel like I'm picturing like Breakfast Club, where you're just like running down the halls and nobody's
there. Nobody's there. If I need to use the mass spec machine, like I don't have to apply and wait a month because nobody else is doing anything. So it really was a blessing in disguise. So that's really, when you talk about, work in an academic institution, I got to give, the University of Nevada, Reno, a big shout out there, because they really were the springboard that launched us within that first year and gave us access to things that we never would have had otherwise.
It's a really amazing story, not only about being visionary and a brilliant mind, but also how a misfortune, right, and adversity really turned into something great.
Yeah.
And I certainly hope, just for the sake of fairness, that you would send a nice note to those professors and saying, hey, I got some experience and then some. We're making it. We're doing it.
Well, it's interesting, Cam, too, because we've actually had a number of conversations more in the AI side of things, but also maybe just in the academia side of things in general, of this whole idea of like the way the world works today is starting to disrupt traditional approaches to education. So I love your story in that sense. I would never have thought that would happen in this particular area, but it's a cool story, and I think we're going to see more of that kind of disruption.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I don't think we're necessarily unique within that. And yeah, to your point, Elena, I mean, there was many chemical processes and steps that would take a few hours here, a few hours there, that I would have to wait for. So, and I don't know if you guys have ever been to Reno, Nevada. I had not spent a lot of time there, but the campus is quite literally like 1.5 miles, 2 miles away from downtown Reno. So if I had a couple hours in between running this chemical reaction and coming back, I would actually just go to the casinos, play some blackjack, and then come back and do more work. So yeah,
you're like, come on, baby, fund my company.
Yeah, totally. No, it's a good thing that I did not bet the company at the tables, because I think that was a net negative financially for me. But yeah, that was,
for you personally.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question on it's related to placing some bets, but not those kind of bets, which is a lot of the companies, and you've used the tech industry as an analogy for what you're doing now in biology. But a lot of the biggest, most successful companies, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, or whatever, whether we call it an operating system or not, it's kind of like, obviously Microsoft literally created an operating system, but Facebook is kind of like, was like a foundational social media, Amazon, of course, a foundational e-commerce or whatever. Do you see rBio as, you talked about it's a platform. Do you see it as sort of like that kind of operating system like approach, or do you see yourselves more as a therapeutic company that's usually in synthetic biology?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm glad you asked that, because I'm actually in a hotel room here in San Francisco. And if you guys have ever been here, I've driven up the 101 here, and everything on the billboards is all AI right now. It's all high tech, everything, right? And so when you describe what we're doing as a type of operating system, I've actually used that on multiple occasions, especially with people in this area where I am right now, because they kind of think that way. They understand that if you come to them and say, hey, we're augmenting, or we're raising the expression levels of protein synthesis, some people may say, oh, well, okay, that sounds interesting. I don't know what that's useful for. But if you come back to them and say, hey, think of biology as really a type of coding language. Instead of ones and zeros, you have A, C, T, and G. So what we're doing is really creating biological software. The cool thing is that the software actually creates the hardware, as opposed to computing, where it's really the opposite. And just by changing the framing of what you're talking about, all of a sudden it can really click with people who may have no idea about science, hated chemistry 101 or biology 101, but did all the computing class. Now you're speaking to them in a language that they understand. So Eric, to your point, I've used that many times, actually.
Yeah, and actually, just to follow up on that, like in the biotech space, where I've, and I spend a lot of time trying to raise money recently, not necessarily so successfully, but but I always kind of put it in terms of there's East Coast and West Coast money in biotech, and the East Coast is like very, very kind of like therapeutic is the only way to go. I think there's definitely more in the West Coast, these what's it called, the A2Z or whatever it's called. Those guys who are sort of like Google derived or whatever, they'll think a little more outside of the box. But have you come across that problem of like people are like, but what disease are you treating? Is that also in play in your space?
It is. I would say I've come to find, it's interesting when you start something, you have to really become an expert in a lot of things very quickly. I consider myself a microbiologist by training and really an expert in that. I often joke and say if I'm not, I'm only an expert in that, right? I'm not an expert in other things. So if I say something in microbiology, trust that it's a good opinion or thought. But if it's something else, take it with a grain of salt, and trust but verify maybe. But to your point, when it comes to fundraising, of course, now you have to become an expert salesperson, because if you don't have the money to do what you need to do, and for us, obviously, is the first several years are going to be research and development heavy. That's a high cash burn, and so you really have to become an expert in selling a vision and a dream, and how you're going to get from point A to point B, and how this money is going to be useful to get there. And of course, as an investor, you may be the best company in the world, but if there's no path to exit, or if there's no way that they turn $1 into $10, then it doesn't matter, right? So to your point, I've come to find that depending on the person that I'm talking to, within the first couple minutes, I have to figure out what language they're speaking, so to say, and then be able to speak it back to them. Because if you're not, if somebody wants to hear about therapeutics, okay, what specific peptides are you looking at?
Right.
If they want to hear that, and you're talking about biological code, you're not on the same wavelength.
Talking to the wrong person. Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
So Cam, I think we gave you fair warning that at some point in the middle of the discussion, I would let ChatGPT ask a couple questions. Okay. And
sure.
So I've got 10 questions. I asked that the prompt was, what are 10 funny questions you could ask the president of a synthetic biology startup? So I am not responsible for what it came up with. I just pick my favorites. I usually ask people, do you want to do absurd or thought-provoking first?
Absurd, for sure.
It's almost everybody goes absurd.
Yeah.
Well, there's so many good absurd ones, though. I'll go with this one. How do you think a synthetic biologist would fare in a zombie apocalypse?
Ooh. I mean, the first thing that came to mind, if you guys remember, what's that movie, I Am Legend, with Will Smith?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna say you would fare pretty well as long as you can get past the initial, the initial wave. I think you have an advantage. Although I will say, and I don't mean this negatively against my fellow biologists, we would probably not be survival in that way. So I'm gonna say as a whole, not very well.
Excellent. All right. So my thought, I don't know if this is a thought provoking, but and I'm going to tweak this question a little bit. The question it asked was, what's the funniest or strangest question you've ever been asked about your work? And I'm just going to add to that by a potential funder, maybe. It's strangest question.
I have definitely been asked if our technology has the potential for like the end of the world, and our technology, no, probably not. But as synthetic biology, I view it kind of the way that people view AI nowadays, right? Like, sure, could you create the Terminator that creates more Terminators and wipes out humanity? Sure. Could you use AI as a tool to benefit humanity? Certainly. So, I guess the strangest question would be like, am I one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse? Like, no, I definitely am not. No.
You know, it's kind of interesting because I'm going to ask you completely not ChatGPT generated conversation, but along those lines, as you were describing the, essence of synthetic biology. I want to know, to what degree do you identify with Professor Dumbledore?
Professor Dumbledore. Well, he was a little bit different because he had the power of magic. If I could have the power of magic and could get my bugs to do exactly what I wanted them to say, much easier, that would be amazing. Unfortunately, biology is very hard, and even if you think you have the right answer, your bugs will think otherwise. And for those who are listening who don't understand what I'm saying with bugs, or they're thinking insects, people really refer to bugs in this field as the microbes that you have, and not like a spider or something like that. But Dumbledore was the best person in the Harry Potter books, in my opinion. So if I could be on that level,
he was, and he created some amazing things, and some things that really exceeded kind of, even in the world of Harry Potter, predictability, right?
Sure.
So that's kind of an interesting angle.
So I'm going to take a little bit of a maybe annoying to you, Cam, because it's probably like, wait, why does AI get all of this attention when our stuff is just as cool? But since almost every conversation at some point tips to AI, not just because we asked ChatGPT, how do you see AI affecting what you do? Are you using it to design the proteins to improve the yield and et cetera? Or is it more aspirational?
Yeah, and that's a question I get all the time. People are always saying, "Hey, AI is the new thing. Like, how do you incorporate that into what you're doing?" And the truth is, do we use a lot of it today? And the answer is not really, because we had to really design all of this kind of the old-fashioned way by hand. And I'm not home right now. If I was, I'd show you a book. I have a notebook that's just full of pages and pages of handwritten genetic code that I've put out there, and then checked sequences and done all that. So from an AI standpoint, certainly in the future, I would never want to do that again. If I could have an AI go through and double check all the work, that would be awesome. But from a longer term, larger aspect, the two technologies will merge. And when it does, that's when I maybe get a little bit nervous, because it's like, what's going to happen? I'm less worried about things like chemical warfare, things like that, but biological warfare could certainly wipe us out in a short amount of time. So does an AI entity merge with the biological entity and create the the ultimate death knell into humanity, or does it come together to solve all of humanity's problems? Hopefully it's towards the latter, not the former. But that's the AI thing. But no, everybody asked me that same question. Well, how can you incorporate this? From a specific answer now, again, I'll come back to a low-hanging fruit, like drug discovery is a great way to use AI. What are active sites that you could find within cells that could trigger something downstream that you may not even as a researcher think about, but running it through a computer model, it may come up to solutions and things that
I've heard of people doing like codon optimization can improve yield, etc. And I don't know if those are like very, very standard, use this codon versus that codon, but are there sort of meta trends that lead to higher, beneficial traits in these sequences that you can actually capitalize on, not just for the insulin, but maybe for the next protein, et cetera? Is that not there yet, or?
Oh no, it definitely is, and I think you're the first person that's ever mentioned codon optimization to me. And as a microbiologist now, you've got the twinkle in my eye on this one. If you're going to introduce, for example, the pro-insulin sequence into a microbe that doesn't normally express that, you do have to codon optimize it into the platform that you're working with, because if you don't, then it's not perfectly optimized, right? You have to do that to create it to the system in which you're working with. It's kind of like a language, right? It's a genetic language. You need to speak E. coli in order for the E. coli to produce at the highest thing that you want, right? No, that's great. I haven't heard that since the inception.
I'm super proud of myself for that.
Yeah.
So I will just say, as you all are talking, maybe the craziest use of Gen AI I've heard, or the most interesting, was there's a company out here in Boston, and Eric probably knows the name of the company, but what they are doing is essentially they have fed into essentially a large language model style, app, program, whatever, and they've essentially fed in the folding patterns associated with different peptide sequences and so forth. And so what they were doing is like they would come up with a folding pattern that they were looking for, and then they would essentially have the sequence, and then they were creating it. I don't know, it seems like you take all those things and you put them together and you can get some pretty wacky stuff that you're.
Oh yeah.
I remember the guy's first name. I just can't even remember the name of the company. Do you know who he's talking about?
I do not, but I am familiar with that. In fact, I have a specific reference about that. This would have been probably in 2009, maybe 2010. I was taking a night class. So I did microbiology at the University of Arizona. So if anybody's listening, bear down. But this was one of the classes one of the higher level classes that I took, and the professor at the time was talking about how in the future that will be the key to drug discovery. You won't have to screen for molecules or go,
right,
find these from sea worms or just weird things there. You could actually say, okay, here's your active site, or here's your target that you're looking for, and you can build something around that synthetically. So that was the first time I heard about it, probably 15 years ago. But now with the advancements in computing technology, with AI, things like that, these are becoming, realistic applications of it. So, but am I familiar with the specific incident you're talking about? No, but I am familiar with what that looks like. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, so I'm gonna go even more out of the norm. Maybe I can get another checkpoint next to my name.
You're doing great.
The sort of Feynman, Eric Drexler, W. Drexler, nanotechnology type of, do you see what you're doing eventually becoming a way to just co-opt biology to do nanoscale manufacturing of things? Or is that are we talking 40 years in the future? Or
you don't know. In my view, yeah, it'd probably take some time to get there, but that could happen very rapidly with with the way things go. I mean, I doubt the people who were working on the early form of personal computing would have anticipated that, you know, 20, 30 years from now, everybody would be talking in this way, or you'd be driving down the road in the middle of nowhere, it could still access, you know, videos of on your YouTube and play music through your car, Bluetooth. Like, I don't think people could have imagined how fast that we would have gotten there. So I don't think it will take that long. And you got to remember that the vast majority of biology is on a nanoscale anyways. I mean, a molecule like insulin is only, you know, 5.5 kilodaltons in weight. It's not that big. I mean, it's really hard to think and visualize and really comprehend how small these things are that happen. I mean, we think in you know, biological systems, right? Things that we can see, we can touch. Okay, my hand is this big, but there are, you know, billions and billions of cells that we can't even see that incorporate just this, you know, much less our.
Right.
So to your point, yeah, we'll get there because it's already on that scale. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, no, it's really just a question. You know, that was the whole vision, was like, can you build a manufacturing platform at that scale, and why not use the technology, if you quote unquote, that already works at that scale? Sorry, Elena, I cut you off before.
Oh, no problem. I actually wanted to talk about scaling and ask you, as a scientist, what do you find the easiest part of scaling such a futuristic science, and what's the most difficult one?
Okay, so I don't think there's anything easy involved with scaling. I think everything is difficult. And I mean, I say that half joking, but mostly serious. You know, for us, the first really 3.5 years, we're all working what I'll call a lab scale. You know, you're looking at 200 to 250 milliliter, you know, batch runs, test runs, things like that, which is pretty small. But obviously, if you want to have a technology that is, for lack of a better term, useful, especially in like pharmaceutical manufacturing, which is where we're trying to play into, it has to work at scale. You know, you could, and as an analogy, you know, you could build one car that's just the best car that the world has ever seen, but you don't really have a company if you built that one. And you may sell that car for $100 million or something, but you don't really have a business. And so the same is true for us. We have to be able to perfect and scale this technology. And, you know, coming back to something I said earlier, biology is hard. You know, you may have it perfected at 250 milliliters, but when you go up to 20 liters, 100 liters, 1,000 liters, things change. I mean, the molecules themselves change, you know, quote unquote, because and I keep coming back to insulin. That's just our reference right now, and we've used it. You know, insulin has a 3D shape. It has electrical charges. It has, you know, binding characterizations that other things don't have. So if you're trying to purify insulin in a small scale, that may not be too challenging in 250 milliliters. But when you're trying to purify out kilos at a time at a 50,000 liter scale, the two things are so far apart that they're almost not even really related to each other at that point. So the challenge that we have as a business is obviously scaling, going from here to here to here, because every step is really like reinventing the wheel, so to say. A lot of the things that you've learned, you can apply into the next scale, but a lot of those things really don't even matter. So it's, and that's the headache, that's the gray hairs, that's the staying up awake at night thinking about it for our business is absolutely scaling.
Well, the gray hairs happen even if you don't think about those things, as I can attest to. But Cam, this is one of the hardest episodes I've had to stop break, because I just want to keep talking to you about this stuff. We have actually hit well past the half hour, and so we're going to just do what, as we told you, we're going to go around and give you an opportunity to say one thing that you want to leave our audience with. So, Kim, why don't you kick us off, and we'll go around.
Yeah, sure. Since obviously this was a discussion around synthetic biology, I would like to leave you and really your audience with this thought. You know, synthetic biology is not the future. It really is now, right? We're standing at the brink of a biological revolution, so to say. that has the potential to solve some of the world's most pressing problems, right? Think of things like sustainable energy, personalized medicine. For us, pharmaceutical manufacturing. For me, I think it's a really exciting time to be involved in this field, and I would encourage everyone just to keep an eye out on the incredible innovations that are coming, not just from us, obviously us, because I'm biased for us, but with what other companies are doing. The possibilities are really endless, and I think we're just getting started. So it's a fun time to be alive.
Awesome. Well, I will jump in next, but before I give my one thing, Kim, what's a good place for people to connect with you, reach you if they want to learn more or fund you, or whatever it is?
Yeah, sure. Anybody can write checks. You can send it right to my personal account. That would be nice. But no, my email is just a shortened version of my name, so it's Owen at rBio.com.
That's awesome. Thanks. And I guess, first of all, I'm just glad that I could understand it, being the guy who's like mostly spent his life in food and restaurant marketing.
I don't know how I feel when we talk about marketing all the time.
But no, I agree with Eric. I mean, I have so many questions that we could have kept going. This was a fascinating conversation, and it's very cool stuff that you're doing. So super excited to see where you and rBio go next. And I will pass it over to Elena.
Thank you.
So yeah, I would actually second that. And I would say thank you, Cam, for kind of whetting our appetite, because I was thinking the same thing. I better read up some more on synthetic biology, because of personalizing medicine is definitely close professionally to what I'm doing. Passion for climate and sustainability improvement is very much a personal passion. I didn't really think that synthetic biology plays on the latter so much, although I did read about the microbes that destruct plastic, and I certainly hope we make more of them. So really, I think both for us and for the audience, it's a very interesting eye-opener into this really fascinating field. So that was my take.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
I was gonna say, and you guys can always reach out to me. I mean, as you can tell, I'm very passionate about this field, and I love talking about it. So anytime. You can always invite me back on too, for a follow-on episode.
I'm sure we will.
So my one thing is actually going back to the conversation we were having about therapeutics versus operating system. And I just, hopefully, I don't know, maybe I get you more in trouble by saying this than help you, but just be like to people who are thinking about funding a company like rBio, actually, the operating system type companies are the ones that actually get really, really big. But I think there's this kind of tendency for people to think about particularly in biotech and pharma, to think about the therapeutic as the only way. And then they have that cynical sort of, 20 of you will fail, but one of you might succeed and make us rich kind of plan. So I hope people think, can not only see the value in the actual therapeutics you're going to be able to bring and the benefits, but also the amazing things that this platform might be able to do, not just in biotech, but in a lot of different spaces. So again, I want to thank you so much, Cam. This was really informative. The half an hour has stretched almost into 40 minutes now. It went by extremely fast. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. And if I could, have you record a quick little 30-second about that operating, thing, we can use it as a sales pitch.
Absolutely, love to.
Yeah.
Great, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Awesome. We'll see you guys.